Have you ever had one of those moments where you're so lost in thought that you completely miss what's happening around you? Maybe you're driving home, and suddenly you realize you don't even remember the last 5 minutes of the trip. Or you're eating dinner while scrolling through your phone, only to look down and see your plate is empty, but you barely tasted the food. It's strange, isn't it? How much of life do we actually live? We're always somewhere else, reliving the past, worrying about the future, replaying old conversations, planning what's next. And in doing so, we miss the only thing that's real, this moment. There's an old Zen saying, when walking, walk, when eating, eat. Sounds almost too simple, but think about it. How often do we actually do that? How often are we fully here, experiencing life instead of just going through the motions? The truth is, peace isn't something we find later, when everything is perfect. It's not something we get once we fix all our problems, reach all our goals, or become some enlightened version of ourselves. Peace is right now, in this breath, in this moment. And yet, most of us spend our lives chasing something that was never missing to begin with. Imagine you're sitting by a lake. The water is still, perfectly reflecting the sky above. But then a stone drops in. Ripples spread, distorting the reflection. The more stones you throw, worries, distractions, regrets, the more chaotic the water becomes. This is what happens to our minds. We wake up, and the first thing we do is check our phones. Our thoughts immediately start racing, work deadlines, emails, messages, things to do. The mind becomes a storm, constantly moving, never still. But what if we stopped? What if, just for a moment, we let the water settle? That's mindfulness. It's not about escaping life. It's about fully stepping into it, seeing things as they are instead of through the fog of our thoughts. And the best part? You don't need anything special to practice it. Mindfulness is already here, waiting for you to notice. The next time you eat, really taste the food. Feel the texture, the warmth, the subtle flavors you never noticed before. The next time you walk, really feel the ground beneath you. Notice the way your body moves, the air touching your skin. And the next time you breathe, really breathe. Feel the rise and fall of your chest, the air entering and leaving your body. Because here's the thing. This moment is the only one that exists. The past is just a memory. The future, just an idea. But this breath, this second, this is life. Life has a funny way of working itself out, doesn't it? Sometimes it feels like everything we do just vanishes into thin air, but other times something small we did, something we barely even remember, comes back around in a way we never expected. Maybe you've had a moment like that. A time when you helped someone out just because, and then months or years later, that kindness found its way back to you. Or maybe the opposite, you made a selfish choice, thinking it wouldn't matter, and somehow it came back to bite you. That's pretty much what happened to Candida, a guy who had done a whole lot of bad in his life but had one tiny moment of kindness. And as it turns out, one good deed can go a long way, but it's what you do next that really matters. Candida was the kind of guy nobody wanted to mess with. He was rough, dangerous, the kind of man who took what he wanted and didn't care who got hurt along the way. Lying, stealing, violence, it was just another day for him. He didn't have a single ounce of regret. But even the worst people have their moments. One day, as he was walking through the forest, he spotted a tiny spider crawling across the path. Normally, he wouldn't have thought twice about stepping on it. But for whatever reason, maybe he was lost in thought, maybe he just wasn't paying attention, he let it go. That was it. One tiny moment of mercy in a lifetime of selfishness. And then, just like that, he moved on. Eventually, Candida died, and let's just say he didn't exactly earn a spot in the good place. He found himself in the deepest pits of hell, suffering for everything he had done. No way out, no hope, nothing but endless torment. Until one day, something strange happened. Out of nowhere, a thin silver thread appeared, stretching down from the sky. It dangled right in front of him, shimmering in the darkness. And then it hit him. This wasn't just any thread. It was a spider's thread, the same spider he had spared. Turns out the Buddha had been watching. And even though Candida had spent most of his life causing harm, that one act of kindness hadn't gone unnoticed. This was his second chance, his way out. Candida didn't waste any time. He grabbed onto the thread and started climbing, pulling himself up, higher and higher. For the first time in forever, he felt hope. He was going to make it. He was getting out. Then he looked down, and that's when everything changed. Below him, dozens, no hundreds of other souls were grabbing onto the same thread. And suddenly, fear kicked in. What if the thread breaks? He thought. What if I fall? What if there isn't enough room for all of us? And just like that, he panicked. This is mine, he shouted, kicking at the others, trying to shake them off. And in that exact moment, the thread snapped. Candida plummeted back down, straight into the suffering he had been so close to escaping. But it wasn't hell that pulled him back. It was him. At first, it almost seems unfair. He was so close. He had one good deed, and it counted for something. Shouldn't he have gotten out? But then you realize the thread didn't break because it was weak. It broke because it was never meant to hold the weight of selfishness. See, the only reason Candida got that second chance in the first place was because of an act of kindness. It wasn't much, just sparing a spider, but it was still selfless. And yet, the second he felt like he might lose something, he went right back to his old ways. Instead of thinking, maybe we can all climb together, his first instinct was, no, this is mine. And just like that, he lost everything. It's easy to think, well, I wouldn't have done that. But would you? Have you ever been in a situation where you had something, money, success, and opportunity, and felt scared to share it because you thought you might lose out? Maybe you landed a promotion and worried about someone else taking your place. Maybe you had a little extra money but hesitated to help a friend because you weren't sure if you'd need it later. Maybe you had a chance that others didn't, and instead of lifting them up, you pulled the ladder up behind you. That feeling, that instinct to grasp, to protect, to keep it all to yourself, that's exactly what happened to Candida. And the truth is, we all face that moment at some point. One of the biggest lies we believe is that there's not enough to go around. Not enough money, not enough happiness, not enough success. And so we cling to what we have, terrified that if we let go, we'll end up with nothing. But think about fire. If you take one candle and use it to light 100 others, does the original flame burn any less brightly? No, it grows. That's what Candida didn't understand. He thought there was only one thread, one chance. But maybe, just maybe, if he had helped instead of hoarded, more threads would have appeared. Because the truth is, the universe isn't built on scarcity. It responds to what we put out. And when we choose generosity, when we choose to lift others up instead of pushing them down, something incredible happens. New threads appear. So here's the real question. What will you do when life hands you your thread? Because at some point, it will happen. You'll get a second chance, a lucky break, an opportunity you don't want to lose. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. Hold on tightly, keep it all for yourself, push others away, or trust that there's enough to go around, and lift someone else up with you? Candida got a thread. We all do in some form. The real test is what happens next. Impermanence, learning to let go. You ever had something you really loved just break? Maybe it was an old watch that belonged to your grandfather, or a childhood stuffed animal, or even something as simple as your favorite coffee mug. 1 second it's there and the next gone. Shattered. Irreplaceable. And it's not just things, right? People change. Relationships end. Careers shift. Even the parts of ourselves we thought were solid, the dreams we had, the way we saw the world, those change too. But here's the thing. They were always going to. There's an old Zen teaching about a broken teacup that makes this point perfectly. A student once showed his master a beautiful teacup, proud of how delicate and perfect it was. The master nodded and said, "This cup is already broken." The student looked at him like he was crazy. "No, it's not. It's right here." The master smiled. "For now. But one day someone will drop it or it'll slip from your hands. And when that happens, if you understand that it was always meant to break, you won't suffer. Instead, you'll be grateful you had it while you did. That's impermanence. Everything we love, everything is already in a state of change. The only thing that causes us pain is our resistance to that fact. And yet, we still cling. We hold on to people as if they'll never leave, onto moments as if we can freeze them in time, onto identities that no longer fit us because we're scared of what happens if we let go. But life keeps moving, whether we fight it or not. And the people who suffer the most, they're the ones who are too afraid to flow with it. There's an old Japanese story about a samurai who came to a monk, frustrated and angry. His sword had broken in battle, and to him, this was more than just a weapon, it was a part of him. Without it, he felt lost. The monk listened and then asked him, "Where was your sword before it was yours?" The samurai thought for a second. "It was metal in the earth." The monk nodded. "And before that?" The samurai had no answer. The monk continued, "Your sword was never really yours. It was always changing. First it was, then it was shaped into a blade, now it's broken, and one day it'll rust and return to the earth. This was always its path." The samurai stared at the broken blade in his hands. He had been mourning it like a loss, but now he saw it differently. It hadn't been lost. It had simply become something else. Nothing stays the same. Nothing ever did. That includes things, people, and maybe most importantly, ourselves. The power of suffering, transformation through hardship. There's something about struggle that changes people. Some people get crushed by it. Some people get hardened by it. But others come out on the other side as something completely new. Stronger, wiser, more compassionate. Why is that? There's an old saying, "A diamond is just a piece of coal that went through a hell of a lot of pressure." Coal is dark, brittle, and ordinary. But if you put it under enough pressure for long enough, it becomes something completely different. People are like that too. We don't get to choose whether or not we suffer. That part is guaranteed. What we do get to choose is what we become because of it. There's an old Buddhist story about a man named Agulimla who was feared by everyone. He was a murderer, someone so deep in darkness that nobody believed he could ever change. But one day he crossed paths with the Buddha. Something happened in that moment, something no one could quite explain. Maybe it was something in the Buddha's presence. Maybe it was something inside Agulimla himself that had been waiting for a way out. But that day he made a choice. He left behind the man he had been. He chose to walk a different path. Did that erase everything he had done? No. The people who had suffered because of him still suffered. He still had to live with the weight of his past. But he wasn't the same person anymore. He had gone through the fire, and instead of letting it destroy him, he let it shape him. If someone like Agulimla, someone who had walked so far into the darkness, could change, then what does that say about the rest of us? What does that say about how we hold onto our own pain, our own regrets, acting as if they define us forever? They don't. Nothing does. We're all changing all the time, and suffering, as much as we hate it, as much as we try to avoid it, it has a way of carving us into something new. Think about the hardest thing you've ever been through. The kind of pain that shook you, the kind that made you feel like you'd never be okay again. Now ask yourself, did it change you? Are you stronger because of it? Wiser? More compassionate? Most of the time, suffering doesn't make sense when we're in it. It just hurts. But when we look back, we start to see the patterns, the way one thing led to another, the way the fire shaped us into something different. So the next time you're going through something painful, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" try asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" Because pain, as much as we try to run from it, often leads us exactly where we need to go. And just like the broken teacup, just like the samurai sword, just like Agulimla, we are never truly lost. We are always becoming something new. Mindfulness, the key to inner peace. Life moves fast. One moment you're sipping your morning coffee, and the next, it's already nighttime, and you're wondering where the day went. We're constantly running, chasing success, seeking approval, trying to make sense of everything. It's easy to get caught up in the race, always thinking about what's next, what's missing, what could be better. But Buddhism teaches something radically different. Peace isn't in the future. It's not something we reach once we get the perfect job, the perfect relationship, or the perfect version of ourselves. Peace is right here, in this very moment. That's what mindfulness is all about. It's not just a practice. It's a way of living, a way of truly experiencing life instead of just rushing through it. A long time ago, there was a monk who was known for his deep wisdom. People from all over traveled to seek his guidance, but he always gave the same advice: be mindful, live in the present. One day, a frustrated man came to him and said, "Master, I've heard your teaching 100 times. Live in the present. Be mindful. But what does that actually mean? How do I do it?" The monk simply smiled and poured him a cup of tea. As he poured, the cup filled to the brim, but he didn't stop. The tea overflowed, spilling onto the table, onto the man's lap. The man jumped up. "Master, stop. The cup is already full." The monk gently placed the teapot down and said, "Exactly. Your mind is like this cup, always full of worries, plans, regrets. How can you taste the tea? How can you enjoy life if your mind is always overflowing? Mindfulness is emptying the cup. How to practice mindfulness in daily life. It sounds simple, be present, but in reality, it's not easy. Our minds are trained to wander, constantly jumping from thought to thought. But the good news is mindfulness isn't something mystical or complicated. It's something we can weave into the little moments of our day. Next time you eat, don't just eat, experience it. Instead of mindlessly scrolling through your phone while shoveling food into your mouth, try this. Take a bite, notice the flavors, feel the texture, the warmth, the coolness. Be fully there in that one bite. Next time you walk, don't just walk. Feel it. Notice your feet touching the ground, the rhythm of your steps. Listen to the sounds around you. Feel the air on your skin. Walk as if you have nowhere to be except where you are. And most importantly, breathe. Really breathe. Take a deep breath right now. Feel it enter your body. Feel your chest expand. Hold it for a moment, then let it go. That's life. That's mindfulness. If you think about it, most of our stress comes from either living in the past or worrying about the future. Mindfulness teaches us to come back to this breath, this moment, because this moment is the only one that's real. The lesson of the lotus, rising above the mud. If you've ever seen a lotus flower, you know how beautiful it is. Pure, radiant, untouched. But what most people don't realize is where it comes from, the mud. A lotus doesn't grow in clear, pristine water. It starts in the filth, in the thick, murky bottom of a pond. It pushes through the darkness, stretching toward the light, until one day, it blooms, completely untouched by the dirt it came from. That's why the lotus is such a powerful symbol in Buddhism. It represents us, because let's be honest, life is messy. We all have struggles. We all have pain. We've all been through things that left us feeling stuck in the mud, wondering if we'll ever rise above it. But here's the truth. The mud is what makes the lotus strong. Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of suffering, it's all part of the process. It's not there to drown us. It's there to teach us, to shape us, to help us grow. There's a story about a young monk who once complained to his teacher, "Life is so unfair. Why do we have to go through so much suffering?" The teacher took him to a pond and pointed at a lotus. "Do you see that flower? It wouldn't be so beautiful if it hadn't struggled through the mud first. The same goes for you. Your suffering isn't a punishment. It's what will make you bloom, your journey forward." So what do we do with all of this? First, we start small. We learn to be here, in this moment, instead of constantly chasing the next thing. We breathe, we slow down, we learn to appreciate the simple things, because in the end, those are the things that make up life. We stop fighting change and start embracing it, because everything is temporary. The good, the bad, the struggles, the joy. And that's not something to fear. It's something to be grateful for. And when life throws us into the mud, we remember the lotus. Because just like the lotus, we are meant to rise. The lesson of the lotus, rising above the mud. There's a reason the lotus flower is one of the most important symbols in Buddhism. It grows in the dirtiest, muddiest water, yet it rises above, pure and untouched. Think about that. Most flowers need clear, fertile ground to thrive. But the lotus, it needs the opposite. It pushes through the mud, struggling toward the surface, before finally blooming in the sunlight. And isn't that exactly like life? We all go through suffering. We all have struggles. We all face moments that feel dark and overwhelming. But the mud, the hardship, the pain, the challenges, isn't there to bury us. It's there to help us grow. There's a story of a young monk who once asked his teacher, "Why does life have to be so hard? Why do we have to suffer?" The teacher took him to a pond and pointed at a lotus. "Do you see that flower? It wouldn't be so beautiful if it hadn't struggled through the mud first. The same goes for you. Your suffering isn't a punishment. It's what will make you bloom. Pain is part of the process, but it doesn't define you. No matter what you're going through, you are not the mud. You are the lotus rising above it. Your journey forward. So where do we go from here? First, we slow down. We breathe. We pay attention. We stop waiting for happiness to come someday and start looking for it right now, in the simple moments we used to overlook. We stop running from discomfort and start seeing it for what it is. A teacher, a stepping stone, a necessary part of our growth. And when life gets messy, when we feel like we're drowning in the mud, we remember the lotus. Because just like the lotus, we are meant to rise. Now, I want to hear from you. What's one simple moment today that you can fully experience? A breath? A sip of coffee? A moment of silence? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what mindfulness looks like in your life. And if this message resonated with you, share it with someone who might need it. Because wisdom, like a flame, only grows brighter when it's shared. Breathe. Be here. Live fully.